Welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. It is TJ, and we are still talking about cognitive distortions. I started trying to piece it all together because I've mentioned before that something about that book, the David Burns book, kept surfacing in the brain for something, but I just didn't know what. Well, I took it a step further, and I think I may be onto something. So this is brand new research. In my history, I had met people that have the cluster B, and I'd mentioned before that a lot of them seem to adopt the various distortions that we covered in the previous few episodes. But then I started thinking about it a little bit differently, because I remembered any time I had remembered one of those distortions and was interacting with the, at the time, unknown cluster B, I noticed how he or she would make certain statements, and I would immediately recognize it as, that's a cognitive distortion. So I would see the person saying whatever they're saying, and I'd be like, but wait a second. And I would try to undo it the way the book does, what you're supposed to do for yourself, and it didn't meet with success. And more on that in a moment. But what you have to understand first is, in this case, the cluster B person was saying what they were saying for a specific purpose. So for me to step in and logically tear it apart and say, oh, well, actually, that's not correct. It should be that. They think I'm being a Mr. Know-it-all, plus I'm threatening their mask, which I had no idea I was doing. So, to begin, in order to understand the information that is about to follow, first I want to establish what I'm referring to as far as two people being on two different wavelengths. I'm sure you could probably imagine what that refers to, but an example I'll give that's not identical but will hopefully make it clear would be back when I worked in collections on the phones for a large credit card company. Every so often people would become past due. So I would answer the call, hello, this is whoever, and what would happen would be sometimes a customer would call in to say they wanted their late fee taken off. Well, that's a common occurrence, but what was interesting would be in certain situations, more than one, I would actually answer the line, yes, this is so-and-so, what can I do for you? And they would say, I want you to take this late fee off. Blah, blah, blah happened and blah, blah, blah. And I'd be listening and immediately looking at my little criteria as far as the late fee removal, and I would see their history was perfect. They just happened to miss one. So here I was looking at it oh, this qualifies. So as I hear this yeah talking, when they stopped, I was like, okay, well, we'll go ahead and get that fee taken off. It'll take about 1 or 2 days. And then my response I got was, you better take off that fee. I'm going to call my attorney. You people this and you people that. And it's like, sir, we will go ahead and have that fee removed. It should take 1 or 2 days. And I'd still hear, you people, oh, I can't believe you. I'm going to call the Better Business Bureau. And it's basically his mind was that he wanted his fee taken off, and he was just 100% sure we were going to say no. And here I was 2-3 times saying, yes, 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 but his wavelength he was on was that we're not going to help him. Well, this is a parallel as far as two different people on two different wavelengths, because one is clearly solving the problem, the other one doesn't think the problem is going to be solved, so it just acts as if it's not being solved. So, great. Well, this ties into these cluster B fools. And with this, you've got basically, if it's a movie, you've got two characters. You've got you, who is the human being encountering some new person, and then you've got the second character, character B, which is basically a predator. A predator with evil intentions that are hidden, that wants something from the first character. So if you think of your interactions with your cluster Bs in this manner, it kind of makes it a little bit easier to comprehend But basically you've got you who's hanging out with whoever and talking about yourself and your thoughts and how you feel and whatever. Then you've got the other person who is playing you, basically using you or fooling you to get something from you that he or she knows would never be an option unless this act was being played out. So there are the two characters you've got here. And there are two different strategies. So if this cluster B monster has strung the first character along long enough, they start to get kind of used to each other and start to just accept each other. But down the road, eventually, things will happen, such as the cluster B might make certain statements, which I'm going to give some real examples of in a moment from the Cognitive Distortions. But they're doing what they're doing as far as these claims they're making for an agenda. Whether that agenda is to make you feel sorry for them, whether it's to make you pity them, which is very common, or it could be any number of things. But I've learned these cluster Bs frequently choose from these cognitive distortions, and they present them as like fact and reality. And here previously I was thinking, oh, these people are stupid, they need to learn something. I think now it's like maybe that was wrong. Maybe they use those distortions because they think that they work, and sometimes they do. Because not everybody has studied the Feeling Good book and may actually buy into that stuff. And I think that's what the cluster Bs are looking for, because they're not expecting someone to come back with a logical response to whatever distortion claim they've made. And so that's what we're about to move on into. I will be briefly reiterating the 10 cognitive distortions in relation to cluster B encounters, which I'm not sure, this may be interesting. So I will begin. The first one, number 1, was all or nothing thinking. Well, we're no longer talking about being depressed and thinking, oh, I failed this test. No, now we're taking these concepts and we're relating them to others we may meet. And the perfect scenario would be that you've met some new love-bombing person who's showered you with attention and gifts and things, and you may have said, this is weird, you shouldn't give me all this, and you probably got the usual, what's wrong with you, I'm just being nice, kind of stuff. Well, we're looking at these in a different manner now, because it's no longer coming from you. It's coming from an outside source, which is the cluster B. So the all or nothing thinking example that comes to mind would be somebody's chasing after me and I'm like right out of a long-term situation and really not interested in jumping right back into another one. So a lot of these cluster B people, if you give that vibe out, like if someone approaches you and like flirts and stuff and says, hey baby, let's do this, let's do that, and you say, thanks, but I'm not really interested in those kinds of things because of A, B, C, D, E, you're like prime target, just so you know. Don't be surprised if the person, oh, you were hurt by someone? Oh, I know what that's like. Even though the person saying this is probably one of the same types of perpetrators that you're running from, but that comes out later. However, during their process of their love bomb phase or idealization, you may come across some of these things. And the first is all or nothing thinking, which I have personally noticed in situations like, I'll give you some fake examples here and there to try to illustrate these, but you just met some new person and you were instantly attracted for some superficial reason, and you're talking and maybe you're texting each other, and let's say you take the first step and say, hey, would you like to go here? And you go out together to a restaurant. and you have a few drinks and a dinner. Great. Well, let's say you do that on a Friday. Well, then you go back to your regular week throughout the week, and then you talk again, and it comes up again like, hey, do you want to go out this Friday again? And so it becomes like a 2-week-in-a-row deal. Well, and let's just say you are just out of a relationship and you're not trusting anyone just like that. Well, let's say you go the second week and you have the dinner, you talk, you laugh, you have fun. However, the third week, maybe something else comes up for you, because you do, after all, have your own life. Because you've come to meet this new person doesn't mean that you just didn't exist until that day. It means you're still who you were before. But so let's say the third week, the person's all excited, saying, oh, I can't wait to see you this Friday. I thought we could hit. And before they can finish, you'll be like, oh, I just thought I should tell you, I won't be able to do that Friday. Because, insert real reason here, yeah, my sister's in town, and she and her husband want to take me to here and there, and they want to do this and do that, and blah, blah, blah. Well, here's where you may hear an example of a cognitive distortion, which, keep in mind, is not being used in the same manner in which you may have used it. But doesn't matter, it's a different forum. So you may, if this person's trying to chase you, and you're not like giving in instantly to everything they want, you're likely to hear an all or nothing thinking phrase, such as, great, you can't go out Friday? Well, I guess then I'll never see you again on a Friday. All or nothing thinking is that they saw you the first 2 Fridays, and then the third Friday, something else came up, and so you couldn't do the usual. And so that person is, I believe, using manipulation and borrowing a cognitive distortion, thinking it's effective, to use on you, to manipulate, hoping that you will think that the person's suffering in some way and say, oh, are you so, oh, well, you can come with, or something. But I don't fall for that stuff. But anyway, they'll use the all or nothing thinking, and you see it and think, is this person serious? And you could easily argue like David Burns would, which is, you're never going to see me on a Friday? Well, you just did for the past 2. And you could address it. You could say what I just said, but they will still sometimes want to come across as being hurt or injured because you're not going to do the same thing for the third time. Number 2 is overgeneralization. I said before, these very similar to the first one. Same principle. You're going out for the last 2 weeks. The third week comes, you're busy, and it's the same type of thing like, great, I'll never get to see you on a Friday again. And some people will actually say these things. Now, I believe it's probably part of their act, but if you don't know that, you might think, this person's very sensitive, which, again, these people, when you meet them, they're many times throwing out everything from their bag of tricks. Each personality style they can come up with that's worked here and worked there, hoping one of them gets through to you. And it's just strange because it's like they're trying on different masks. Like, I'll try this one. Hey, I feel this way. It didn't work. Oh. And then they'll try that one. And, oh, that's better. And it's just sick. Because I never knew all this when I was hearing it. But the overgeneralization, yes, it's the same thing where because it didn't work once, it's never going to work again, which is ridiculous. The next one is number 3, mental filter, and it's where you're picking out a negative detail and dwelling on it exclusively, and that could apply towards the cluster Bs too, where every week you've gone to the ball game to see whoever play for 6 weeks in a row, and then the 7th week something comes up. Same type of thing. You may hear an overgeneralization like, you're never going to go with me again. And that is designed as well to bring pity. It's the pity ploy or the pity play. If you're not acting fast enough for this cluster B who wants to rush into marriage after the 2nd date, they may do the mental filter thing, where they'll say things which are designed to impression manage themselves to look like a very weak, vulnerable person, which is designed for you then to say, oh, this poor person really must be hurting. Let me help you. They're trying to get that kind of response out of you. And of course, with me, it didn't work because I'd be like, really? You think that one thing is all there is? And I would just, again, argue it the way that the book does for you if you're undergoing the depression. So, and I don't think they liked that. I think they wanted me to buy their game and think, oh, you poor thing, maybe I should be nicer to you and give you more. And wrong. It's like I know what they're doing, but, and it's tying in now a little bit more that I think about it with these which I mentioned earlier about the two different wavelengths. Well, that's going to be tied into all this very shortly, so stay tuned. Number 4 is disqualifying the positive, which is back to the third one, was you've gone every week for or every month for 6 months, and then one time something comes up. Well, the person is disqualifying the positive by the fact that you've gone for the past 6 weeks, and then the 1 week you're not available, it's over, I'm never going to see you, and they're disqualifying the fact, honey, it's 1 week out of 6 or 7, come on. But these are tactics that are used to gain pity, hoping you'll soften up and lighten up and give in to their agenda, which they won't specifically usually state. 5 is one that we all do, jumping to conclusions. And I've noticed that in a lot of conversations with a lot of these cluster Bs. It's like they speak in this language from all of these distortions. It's just like part of their daily conversation. When I listen to it, I'm thinking, okay, there's a cognitive distortion. He doesn't really believe that, does he? And I don't know if they do. I think they're using it, again, to get a response out of you, which is to either get you to do something or to get you not to do something, which is manipulation. So the jumping to conclusions, like you go out for 3 weeks and then maybe the date takes you to some movie that you'd never heard of and was different from anything you've ever seen before, and then something else in your life happens to come up to interrupt the cycle. The person may jump to conclusions and say something like, fine, because I took you to that movie, John Waters, and you were so offended by Divine's makeup, you're never going to look at me the same way again, are you? And you're jumping to the conclusion, or he or she is pretending to jump to the conclusion that you are done with them because of an imagined scenario. And a lot of these are baiting you to get you to step forward and say, oh no, you poor thing. But I was not that easy when it came to these things. I probably presented a problem because I challenged things. Not being mean, though, just saying, well, do you really believe that? How? And I would like counter it with, how can you think that way, though? You failed a test, but isn't this the first test you? And I would do that kind of thing, which I thought was making conversation, and I was thinking I was lending my expertise to help someone else who may be needlessly suffering, but I wasn't like thinking, oh, you poor dear, oh, let me give you all this. It was just, you don't think that way, do you? Well, let me give you an alternative viewpoint. We've covered emotional reasoning, which is number 7, and that's another one I'll get. And I'd mentioned in another video, which I now have a different addition to it, and this is where we can kind of tie in the different wavelengths, because with the emotional reasoning, a lot of times this is based in manipulation, which we know Cluster B is a master at. So the emotional reasoning, when I'd mentioned before how if I'd said something that someone was offended by or thought was bad, and they'd pout and act all sad, I would say, what's the matter? Because I can tell, like if you have a big old hairdo that's sticking up on top of your head and I say, honey, you look like a peacock. Well, if you cry and run into the back room, I'm going to know that, oh, she must not have liked that. It was kind of mean. But it wouldn't be anything like that. It would just be a regular conversation, and then all of a sudden the person's acting all hurt, which I believe is a part of a manipulation to get me to feel sorry. The pity play, again, is so common with these people. They have very limited skills. And I remember those conversations where they would be all upset and want to pout, and I'd be like, but what are you upset about? Because you did blah, blah, blah. Well, before I had mentioned I didn't like the emotional reasoning, because I would be like trying to say, well, look, if you got a painful message out of that, that was not the intent. And I'm trying like to be like David Burns and say, you're upset about this, but I'm the one you're claiming made this happen, and I'm right here telling you that was not intent. And instead of saying, really? Oh, I feel better, I've determined now, after studying and thinking and listening, the person is, in fact, trying to impression manage themselves to appear to be very sensitive, and I'm guessing which is designed to unconsciously tell you to back off somewhat, or to get you to feel sad or guilty and make sure you're more, maybe a way of controlling you to be a little more gentle or sensitive in certain areas, because it's clear, like I had mentioned before about the two different wavelengths, if your cluster B is saying, oh, I feel so sad because you haven't called me as much, it means you're mad at me or something, and you're like, I didn't call because the phone died, and because I was out of town, no service, and because of this, and because of that. But when they're like still wanting to be mad, I used to feel sorry for them and think they needed some help. But really, I think they are basically playing this role which they've already designed that you're supposed to simply buy right off the bat, like the mainstream media does to the sheeple out there. You turn the TV on, you hear what it says once, and that's true, that's what happened. Well, the cluster B is expecting that from you when it says, like, I feel so sad because of whatever imagined thing is said. They don't expect you to say, but wait a moment, that wasn't the intent. And they love to play a victim then and act like you are bullying them, which is a clue if you're dealing with this kind of thing, because they will do that pouting thing and say, don't you tell me how to feel. Don't you ignore and discount my emotions. It's like, okay, there we go with the different wavelengths. You're not trying to discount emotions. You have not intended anything offensive to anyone, and someone's taken something in that manner, and you are trying to clarify to say, hey, if you want to get mad and upset, wait till I give you a real insult. But this is not a real insult. So, but because they're unwilling to take your other viewpoint on or even consider it, you need to be aware you may be dealing with a manipulative person who intended for you to hear their little line about the way they're feeling so horrible because of this or that. They wanted you to say, oh, you poor thing, oh, let me do this. And you're not doing that. You're giving an unexpected reaction, which, because again, you're on a different wavelength. You're in reality trying to help your friend who seems to be distressed over something they shouldn't, but instead you're being treated like you're some kind of bully who does not care what emotions that person's going through. You just want to tell them that they are wrong, even though you're the one who supposedly created them, and that was not your intent. I think the main point is for them to get you to pity them, which is their trademark for some reason. They think that actually it does give them that narcissistic high or the supply, because they get you to buy into their crap and it makes them feel good. It also makes them think how stupid you are, even though they're very well practiced, and you'll look kind of strange if you just don't believe a word they say, which, of course, I must admit, I would be like, I don't believe a word you're saying. You made that up, didn't you? And it doesn't work. It's, you're crazy. No, I didn't make it up. So don't try that. Well, you can, but labeling, mislabeling. This is a funny one because they may say those statements like, I'm a loser, which I've heard. And again, it's really weird to hear someone say that. and then in another conversation at another time actually talk to you like they are some kind of superior being, like a superhero. And it's just kind of hard to take, and it can result, of course, in cognitive dissonance. And many of these terms are flying in and out because I think they all kind of relate in some way. Number 10 is personalization, the mother of guilt, where, well, we can just use Sex and the City, not Sex in the City Mandela. It's Sex and, as it always has been. But I do recall a specific episode in that entertaining show where Carrie Bradshaw was going to marry Mr. Big, who turned out to be named John. And before the wedding, redhead lesbo I had to take an ADHD break for that one and look it up. But the lesbo redhead, Miranda, she walked up to Mr. Big, I believe, and said, you've got to be crazy for getting married, or something like on the order of that. And then Mr. Big didn't show up or disappeared or whatever, and she was like heartbroken and crushed. Well, eventually, when Miranda finally told her about that little conversation, Carrie Bradshaw, I think it was on Valentine's, not Valentine, Valentine's Day with the balloons everywhere, and people thought they were lesbian lovers, which maybe they are. Well, when she was told this, Carrie just crumbled and crushed and yelled and ran and wouldn't speak to Miranda, which kind of reminds me of junior high drama, but it's a television show for entertainment, and we can all relate to it because we once went to junior high, even though they're not in junior high and they're rich socialites in New York City in huge apartments that must cost a fortune. But the point of that is that Carrie was blaming the whole thing on the fact that Miranda had made that small statement. And my argument to that would be like, look, just because she said that doesn't mean those words magically caused your wedding to fall apart. But Carrie Bradshaw wanted to be mad at her. They eventually made up, so, anyway. And that was number 10. So we're done with the list. So when I talked before about the different wavelengths, like in my circumstance, when I was dealing with various cluster B varieties, I would encounter those kinds of statements, and I would think that, oh, that must be really what this person's feeling. So I would offer the counter part of it, which is, well, yeah, you didn't do good on this test, but didn't you get an A on the last 30 tests? Or something. But or with like the emotional reasoning part, where I'll be on the wavelength of saying, well, you shouldn't be upset, not because I don't care what you think or feel, but because I didn't intend to harm anyone. I just was laughing about some movie or some joke or some whatever, and it seems you're taking that to be some personal thing, so I'm here to explain. And it's just baffling, because if that was me feeling that way and somebody was offering me like a way out, I would be like, oh, really? Oh, I'm so relieved. But these people, I used to think that they just want to be upset and mad, but I think it's they just want to keep their facade going, and they don't want me to try to tear it apart, which I'm not intending, but I don't know I'm dealing with an actor or an actress. So I'm just listening to what I hear and responding to it based on what I know, and it's just a strange way to think of this now, because all this time I just thought they were cognitively distorted, and now it seems they were using those techniques to get pity or sympathy, and I was the problem because I was countering it with logic, which never works with the cluster B. By the way, keep it to yourself, because you will be pulled into a swirling vortex of sickness if you attempt to discuss your feelings about this with the cluster B. Don't try it. Or you can learn your lesson like I did.